Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show. Here's our host, Santosh Sankar.
Hey, ladies and gents. Welcome back to the Future of Supply Chain podcast. I'm your host, Santosh Sankar. And joining me today from a very frigid Michigan is Grace Sharkey, writer at FreightWaves. Welcome, Grace.
Hey, thank you so much. Of course, I've written about a lot of the companies in your portfolio, and it's really excited to spend some time chatting with you about this wonderful industry. So again, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, totally. And we're going to jump into a variety of things today. But FreightWaves, I think, is a household name for the majority of our audience. And I think most people recognize your name having read a lot of the pieces that you author. But what they may not fully know is, what is the Grace Sharkey story? How did you get into the world of supply chain?
Okay, so I'm going to take this back even a little bit before I started to kind of showcase, maybe for those out there in logistics, like an idea of where to recruit us from. But I actually, while at Michigan State, I had a job throughout college fundraising for scholarships. I was that wonderful or a student that would call alumni at 6:30 while they're eating dinner and see if they have, $25 to spare, right? I love that job. It's actually Michigan State. It's called Green Line. They hold the largest student-run fundraising program in, I believe, all of the Big Ten. If not, honestly, I don't know. I think there's one college out there that's pretty close to our size, but it was really great because not only did you kind of get to learn how a business and like fundraising works and that kind of stuff, but you got to talk to alumni, and it was a perfect job for a student to be able to talk on the phone, learn that communication, and I'll just say this, talk about rejection levels. Like, if you think calling and asking people for freight is hard, you try calling someone in the middle of their dinner and asking them for $500. It's not much better, right? A lot of sour attitudes that you have to turn into smiles in order to get business done. And so, that being said, every year, C.H. Robinson, Coyote, the big dogs would come to our job and recruit because we had the skills to call and handle freight. And I saw a number of my friends start to take these jobs and were doing really well in them. The one thing I'll say is that by the time I graduated, I did notice a lot of them were kind of bouncing around, right? They weren't really finding the most managerial type of roles. And you kind of see that still in freight today, right? You jump around with the markets. And with that being said, I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to take a job in this industry, I want to find something that's going to get me an opportunity to grow and to be in a management position. And there was this just small ad in one of our recruiting websites that we use at Michigan State for his name is Brian Bennett. He was looking to start a brokerage and was looking for his basically good hard workers to get it off and rolling. He had come from Worldwide Express, but wanted to get into the brokerage space, saw an opportunity. This was right when the broker bond had went up. So a ton of brokers were leaving the industry because they couldn't afford it. So it was like a perfect opportunity to kind of jump in and get rolling. So I was the second hire, and it was the three of us in this shoebox in a basement, calling customers and carriers and slanging freight, as they say. And what I'm really grateful for in that experience was not only did I get to learn the industry from nothing to, by the time I left Fifth Wheel, it was about $80 million in revenue. I truly got a business degree doing it, right? I remember the first time we had a big customer and they weren't paying, and they're like, yeah, you guys aren't sending proof of deliveries with your paperwork. And it was that kind of stuff, right? Where it's actually learning from zero how to scale and grow a brokerage. And that was my job, was always kind of operations. How do we scale this thing? How do we continue to add bodies? How do we form teams? What do we do in marketing? How do we build out our accounts payable, receivables? Where are risks at? What's happening in the industry? And that's how I got started. We hired people. We moved to Grand Rapids, and like I said, by the time I left there to kind of to start doing things on my own, it was about a little over 100 employees, about $80 million in revenue, and um, it was just for me. It felt like getting a master's while having to really pay for the master. In fact, the opposite. Someone pays you to get the master's degree. So
That's right.
I'm so grateful for it because I think it's helped me now in my role, right? Where I have the experience of what a brokerage is, how technology works, what questions people are asking, how to scale. But and I try to explain this to people a lot of times in my writing. I also have the idea of Santosh, so the people that you work with, like what these owners and what these startups and founders are also going through, right? And so I
Hmm.
think it helps me understand not just from an employee perspective, but like also from a leadership perspective of how things need to be done and that nature. So that's how I got to where I am today.
Amazing, amazing. And I guess kind of what I'm picking up is you not only kind of have the subject matter understanding, given
Yeah.
you lived it, you also have kind of the empathy of like, hey, I remember kind of the roller coaster of emotions that comes with kind of growth, losses, and that's just a part of business. But
Yeah,
you also interface with folks who live that day to day, such as
totally.
Hunter at Log Rock, who you wrote about a few years ago.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but I'm going to kind of step forward here because we're staring down the vast majority of 2025 here at the end of January, and I'd be curious, like, given your experience in the brokerage industry, what are you thinking about? What do you foresee unfolding this year? And how might companies stay competitive? Because I know there's some schools of thought that say that, hey, we're coming out of the freight recession. There are others, and I probably bucket myself in this, who are cautiously optimistic, but feel like it might be too early to call. How do you think about this stuff?
I do think that we're getting out of the hardship and starting to get into a more positive environment, which I will say one of my favorite things about this industry is like, we say positive environment. That might not be for the consumer per se, right? But like for this industry, for the drivers, I'm thinking positive. Like one of my, again, to go back to kind of like the founder thing, like it it's funny to like go to a gas station and fill up your tank personally and be like, God, gas is more expensive. But like as an owner in the back of your head, you're like, yes, more revenue, right? Because fuel will go up and rates will go up, right? So that's kind of I have this feeling right now of like a more positive environment for the driver, a situation where I think we're continuing to see big capacity leave, right? Which is great for them. That means their chances of fighting for some of this freight is going to be there. I also think it is, I think it's a little bit supply driven in the fact that, right, it's not so much, that's why I bring up the consumer. I don't think it's so much as the consumer itself is driving this return as much as the supply side of things. And so I look at it when you say like cautiously optimistic, I look at it as a really interesting time to see who takes risk right now, who's willing to like change and really set themselves up for when the demand driven side of this does come to play, and using this unique time period to strengthen up, make the investments that you need to, so then when that gate is fully open, that brokers, we're talking brokers in the space, right, and even carriers, right, can just kind of take off. So I think, we always see this like back and forth. Trust me, I work at FreightWaves. I get it. Of like the market's back, the market's not, the market's back, the market's not. LinkedIn, when I'm talking to you. I read LinkedIn too, guys. I'm part of the algorithm as well. But that's where I'm like, the people that are going to be optimistic and take this opportunity compared to those who are like, I'm not sure, right? I mean, from your perspective, right, working with so many founders and just seeing the space, like, that's why I love working for Craig Fuller, because those who move fast, I think, during this time that's going to showcase itself down the line big time.
So the one thing we are seeing is this increasing trend adopting AI tools. Now, these tools are meant to provide brokers with leverage by removing them from kind of what I call like the rote or really dull part of the operations, right? Load management, scheduling, things like that. But in turn, what that is then promising, and I'll say promise because I don't know if it's kind of been fully delivered or realized rather, is brokers can go back to what they were meant to do originally back in the 1980s when the industry was deregulated, which was relationships, customers, right? Sales.
Yeah.
What have been your observations as you've kind of chatted with startups, brokerages, different industry stakeholders around this particular topic?
AI? Haven't heard about it. What are you talking about? Yeah, no. I think I just put out our call yesterday, right, on it too. I get really excited for it. Not just like the freight tech nerd inside of me getting pumped for it. I think this is going to bring about a lot of change in how these organizations are built. And what I mean by that is like, I don't think 10 years ago, honestly, when I started in this industry, I don't think people were seriously having meetings about who their CTO was, you know? I think that was kind of a background conversation where now, as especially when we talk about AI, some of these tools out there become cheaper and cheaper or easier to build in-house. I'm excited once again to see who takes that opportunity to invest in those people to drive some of these tools within their businesses, within their workflows, and see where they come out the other end. I think those are going to, one of my favorite companies kind of look at Circle Logistics and their leadership there. I think they're really saying to themselves that if we take this moment and apply technology the right way into our workflows, our people are going to not only excel in the jobs that they have, but they're going to be making, I mean, personally, I think they're making a lot more money with a lot less of the stress that they're so used to,
Sure.
right? I think the AI takes a lot of that work out, a lot of the stress I think that people talk about, and especially the brokerage side of things, is like uncertainty in the risk that you're taking. I was just talking to someone in an interview like an hour before this about, as an employee, if you at like a gas station, if you miss someone grabbing a candy bar or, something like that, some type of like theft or something like that comes from your store, what are you really in trouble for? Losing a couple dollars from that company? Whereas like a brokerage representative, they put the wrong person on the load, or they do like a lot of times the negative could be worth $100,000. Like, and so I think if we can start to eliminate like, am I choosing a good carrier? Am I, making enough money on this load, and start to like automate a lot of that? I think what you'll start to see is that stress go away that people complain about, or at the end of the day, kind of make fun of too, right? And you'll start to see a more analytic approach to what you're doing as a broker. And what I mean by that is I think, and sales bros, I love you, and you guys, you're killing it. But I think you're going to see less of this like sales bro, like just pump out the calls, out the numbers kind of stuff. And you're going to see more like data analytics individuals, which is we're replacing sales bros with data nerds, And I think that's exciting because a more small and medium-sized brokerage is going to be able to take on a decently sized shipper and actually bring extremely important value to that conversation instead of just another person that shipper has to depend on for a truck, right? To be able to say to like a medium-sized broker that medium-sized broker also sends you a weekly report on your loading and unloading times at all of your locations and where your risk is and how that's harming you, or a small or medium-sized broker who's able to say, who you're able to ask, where should I put my next warehouse? And they are able to use market analytics to say, this is where you're going to get the best value of truck capacity. Like that, I think are conversations that more small, medium-sized players are going to be able to have with a lot of this tech, with really good employees behind it. That's just like not possible for what some of this tech kind of costs right now. So that's where I get excited, is like seeing more of this put into play, some of the pricing on it coming down, and seeing just like this new wave of the type of individuals that brokerages are hiring and investing in as well. And clearly great news for shippers and companies alike that use them.
Sure. I'm gonna change topics on you here.
Yeah.
You've highlighted issues around freight fraud in your work of late, and I want to delve into this. And a question that's kind of top of mind for me is, are there kind of any process related measures that the industry could implement as a whole? Perhaps, agreed that it's a best practice and adopt on the back of such a statement in order to combat these challenges effectively. Because when I think about freight fraud, there's some, elements where it's like old school, just straight up robbery, if you would,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
almost like the Wild West.
Yeah.
But then there are other instances where it's much more intentional, premeditated, thought out, and almost as a result of that, like you're compromising this kind of tried and true process that's been around for decades. And that's what kind of stems from my question: is there just a better way of practically doing this work to avoid such issues?
I have two answers for this. One is going to be, it's not really a sarcasm. I'll leave that one for the last one. I think the first one, the obvious one, is setting up a really strong onboarding process, right? How are you onboarding carriers? How many verification checks are going into that? Are you checking their insurance, or are you just slinging the load on the load board? Someone gives you a call, no matter what the rate is, and you're just clearing it and letting it go by. I think that is a big issue, and I think there's a lot of technology out there that's willing to solve that. Here's my point the finger back at the industry response, and that is, I think this industry could do a lot better job on building strong carrier relationships that would avoid that scenario. There's a lot of brokers out there. Usually happens a little bit on the smaller side, but there's a lot of brokers out there who statistically, if you pull their data, they're a lot of their carriers have taken less than 5 loads from them and have never taken a load since, right? And I mean, think about like any other business kind of acting that way, right? Like any other industry, it's kind of shady. Like, and it's a risk that you take when you operate. So a lot of times I think if we could push that metric where, let's say 50% of carriers have taken more than 10 loads from you, right? The likelihood that those situations are happening are probably less. And again, back to the tech, how are you working on your carrier relationships? How are you negotiating certain lanes? Are you giving them out one by one? Are you working with one carrier and saying, we want to give you this big chunk of business? How do we continuously put you on this lane? What rate do we need to be? How do we make this a long-term relationship compared to like this one-off? Like, what can you, there's definitely space, and there needs to be space for both of those, the contract and spot kind of relationships. But
Yeah.
when you are so heavy in the spot, it's a risk you take doing business. So again, if we can like eliminate that and work on that metric, I think you'd also see your fraud instances, double brokering instances starting to fall down as well.
Have you seen kind of any novel applications of technology to either improve security, but also enhance transparency around these items?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely been a few. I would almost say like a combination. Like I've talked to a lot of leaders in this space, because right now I'm just getting hit left and right with like companies like Highway, Carrier Sure, Verified Carrier, right? There's like a handful of them that are out there, and they're constantly popping up. And a lot of the people I talk to say like none of them are the one solution, right? Right? Like they use a multi approach to figuring that out. I mean, I've even, to bring up Circle Logistics, interviewing them, they leverage Carrier Sure with happy robot in order to verify what phone calls are even legitimate. So it's like they're not even picking up the phone if you're not a legitimate person, right? Let alone like having a conversation. So to say there's like one in particular, I wouldn't say that so much as I think what's really exciting is seeing how people are partnering and working together with these different
Super,
companies.
yeah.
Yeah, to like make an actual like good. And I think that's what it's going to need, honestly. I think when you talk about how do I secure my business, how do I avoid fraud, it's got to be a tech stack approach and much less of like, what's the one thing that's going to save me? So,
I love that. Yeah.
yeah,
Is
that's
there
what
a
I'd say
question
there.
about freight fraud that I should be asking that I'm not?
Well, you bring up AI, and this is something that I just was talking to someone. If you read my recent article on AI, I bring this up. And I think, again, this is something that our whole country is kind of dealing with even right now. As these technologies improve, bad news. The bad guys are getting it too, and they're already learning how to get around it. So again, going back to like my whole tech stack situation, I was just talking to someone about how, and it's, I don't know the name of what AI tool, conversation tool they're using. So I definitely don't want to point fingers at who could that be, but they were using, the bad guys are getting their hands on those conversation tools and using them to call in and take loads too. So it's like, what you need to kind of consider is every step that you take to avoid fraud, the bad guy is probably already thinking about a way around that. So it's just one of those, and for I'm sure investors like yourself, you love to hear, it's just it's a piece of this industry I don't see getting easier. If anything, I see it getting more and more difficult. And then I start thinking about the cybersecurity issues that we have just alone, like in our own phones. I just was watching a documentary, and now like every time I go to bed at night, I turn my phone off completely and turn it back on because it's like you that alone can help save you from a lot of the cyber attack issues that you're seeing. But I start to like think about like who are you letting into your office? Like when your IT team comes to visit to update, software in house, do you have a special badge for them? Do they just get to walk right in? Like I just think that our industry is so vulnerable to a real heart attack, and I wish, and I understand why, but I wish people would speak up more about it because I think there are a lot of companies that have these issues and you're afraid you don't want to lose customers, you don't want to bring it up. But I think if people were speaking more about it, you'd be shocked at how frequently that's happening. And I mean, it already happened. Look at like Blue Yonder, right? Like if Blue
Mm-hmm.
Yonder can get attacked, if Starbucks can go, I'm a Starbucks girl, if I lose my Starbucks, like if they can get attacked and have these issues, a mom and pop brokerage downtown middle of nowhereville is just as
Yeah.
easy to take down. So
Yeah.
and brokers, right? The market is getting better and people's cash flows improving. That's not any better either. So yeah, I'm like waiting, knock on wood, waiting for the day that we hear about a huge company having a big issue, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
So the one awesome part I think about both of our jobs is that we get to meet and learn from super smart and ambitious people. And the question I have for you on the back of that is, what is the most interesting thing you've learned about supply chain recently?
Okay, I learned about a lot of stuff. So, I'll just put that
Give me
out
the
there,
one.
right? Here's a recent one that I learned about. I know a lot about domestic freight, so I really like to kind of learn more on like a global scale a little bit more. And I recently was reading a report about issues with our rerouting about through the Red Sea. So, because so many of these ships now are going around the Cape of Good Hope, right? Um, there is honestly, it's a deadly current that goes through that area, and it's caused some big, big, big container losses. I pulled these stats up because I was like ready for this question. In July of this past year, 44 containers were lost. 30 were damaged on the CMA CGM Benjamin Franklin. In August, 99 containers were lost. In September, 46 containers went overboard. In October, they lost 5 empty containers, which is capacity, right? So you might be like, okay, at least I didn't lose product, but capacity is also an issue. And that's just all because we're rerouting, right? If we could avoid that, but we can't because of like how this world is made right now at this point in its being. And again, that's not a problem you can change. Like no tech guy can go out there and solve the Red Sea situation, right? So I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating. I call it like right now I'm going through like a big you could call it rabbit hole, right? Like of rerouting across the globe. Like not only looking at that, clearly the Panama Canal is an issue. A big one that Life and I have been like fangirling about is the Arctic. Like Russia and China have an enormous amount of money they're putting into icebreakers in order to make that route more accessible. And even, we kind of, politics aside, we kind of joke about like, should we own Canada? Should we own Greenland? That kind of stuff. But in a world where like we need ports over there owned by us, like that's actually
There's
very
merit
serious
behind such statements. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So that's kind of like where my rabbit hole like brain is going right now. Like I'm like, oh no, the Arctic, and like being in Michigan and seeing icebreakers like on the lakes and stuff. We only have one icebreaker and it's like 30 years old and it can't do anything. The government just like a couple of months ago approved us building another icebreaker where we have Russia and China who are just like build it,
have an armada effectively.
Yes.
Just icebreakers.
So again, am I concerned about the Arctic tomorrow? No, but it's like fascinating to like see what our grandkids like if they're like, oh, the Arctic lane is real cheap right now. Like it's kind of crazy to think about, right?
Change happening in real time, but it won't be obvious or evident for quite some time. It is fascinating. But I'm going to bring us home here, Grace. And it's not every day that we have a journalist on Talking Shop with us. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to do a bit of PR 101 for the founders joining and listening in. And my first question will be, founders wake up oftentimes in the morning and they'll say, I need to do some PR. Like I need to get word out. I raised this round 9 months ago. I don't know why I sat on it, or I could use a bit of air cover when I'm doing outbound to prospective customers. But all that to say, how should they kind of think about reaching out, building relationships with journalists such as yourself?
Wow, that's a good question. God, where do I start? It's, for me is, so, first off, yes, build a relationship with us like you would anyone else. The one thing that always like frustrates me is like a lot of times news will come out and then I'll get like a PR release 10 hours later from a PR rep. It's like, just get my email and let me know ahead of time. Get me in the conversation. Not only just because like clearly I want to write about the article and have like original quotes and like and actually have a discussion with you about this. But I also because I think like we can do a good job, and I feel like I do a good job at FreightWaves doing this, like helping you figure out how you're going to announce it, right? Like a lot of times for me, if I talk with someone, it's like, awesome, let's write this article, but then I also schedule a podcast or a radio chat to like actually like make the news, like use different avenues to explore that news, right? So like work with us a little bit on that and ask us for our advice when going through that too. I think that's huge. I always suggest and like try to find a customer or an expert or someone that you work with to like back up those statements, right? Like I don't and I think that should be for every blog that you do, anything that you put out. It's like, find a customer that you're working well with and just like take them along for the journey with you. Or even just like certain experts. Um, a perfect example, actually, I think is Vision from your portfolio. They do an incredible job, and I'm actually, I think I'm doing a chat with them, a panel with here with them soon, and they do just a really good job of when we put those panels together of like bringing really great experts and or customers, right, to talk about how this stuff is actually helpful to them, and using like real life cases for some of these technologies, right? So like, as much as I think sometimes I love you founders, like you want to kind of make it about your journey and your story, like bring other people with you to add some legitimacy to that as well, right? Because you and I both, let's be honest, you and I both get it. Like, I'm not going to be able to get certain numbers out of you. You're not going to give them to me if I want to. So, like, trust me. If I ask, I think every time I'm trying to get revenue, I'm not going to get revenue numbers out of you guys. I'm starting to. I have that now. I figured that out. But like let's not make it about the numbers, and let's make it about the impact, right? And like what this technology is doing. So
well put.
like focus on that. Make this a story that someone connects to, because as someone who was in that spot, when I read a FreightWaves story and said, "Oh my God, dude, I'm having that same exact problem," that made me call you and pick up the phone and do a demo. And again, to like kind of full circle this thing, screw it, I don't care what people think about me. That's what I love about my job, is because I understand that. I understand what's going to actually bring you value out of talking with me. So like, let's make sure that we get that done, right? Like whatever, we can put numbers in there, we can do all that, and but like as a writer, especially this day and age, I want you to read the whole article. I don't want you to just get the numbers from the top and then go on your day. I want you to read the whole thing. I want you to go to the next page. I want you to click the link. That's what I want. And in order to get that done, we have to tell a really good story. So just consider that, right? Make the story dynamic with your customers, with your experts, whoever's like following you on this journey, your advisors, etc., and then work with us to make sure that gets done.
So you mentioned a key part is to demonstrate the impact, right? Talk about your customers, talk about the impact you're having on their business. But are there kind of certain topics that are more interesting versus others? And a frequent thing I express to founders is, hey, like you've gone out, you've raised, your first 1.5 million of capital. The reality is that's not that interesting to cover or read about, because you're talking about like in a matter of 3 or 4 sentences, you kind of get that across. That's not really an article. One needs to have much more depth than that. Yeah. So I'd be kind of curious, and I think oftentimes, as is normal with founders, them hearing you say maybe the exact same thing that I'm saying or my colleagues are saying will just land differently, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be curious your take on that.
I'll give you a perfect example out of your own portfolio, actually. One of my favorite interviews I ever did, and I learned a lot during it too, was with SVT Robotics. And because on like a surface level, I haven't been to their website in a while, but like on a surface level, if I read what they do, I'd be like, what? It's like, okay, robotics, right? We get it. But like in that interview, he brought up the history of the USB and how computers were like way too much of an investment for people, because like without the USB connection, there was like no way to also like get a keyboard and a mouse, and like it was just like a huge investment because none of those add-ons, right, like worked well. It was just a lot of money, right, that you had to put up front. And so like when he was explaining how they're trying to like create a USB type of technology so that when people decide for them that they want to invest in robotics, that there's the integration and capabilities into their systems will actually work. And it made sense. I was like, oh, what? And it's one of my favorite interviews, and I bring it up a lot because as someone, I am a freight tech nerd, but like I couldn't build you a computer. I know like a little bit of Python, but like I couldn't code something for you. But when he made that connection, I just thought that like I think it was in a podcast, anyone would get it. And then they would truly understand, oh, like if I'm running a warehouse, like I'm not just gonna be able to like pick my favorite robots and put them in here. Like I need to think about that big picture too. And so like it's almost like dumb it down, like act like if you have a 5-year-old, try figuring out how you would explain your business to a 5-year-old. And that goes, I think, so much further than trying to do this like high level tech conversation. And I'm sure you've seen it in decks too, where it's like, what? Like if you could just make that, like I'm in. And so that one stands out as like a perfect example of how to take something just so high level that people might not understand and using something that not only was like a huge revolution, right, but that we all get. Maybe not Apple, since they want me to have a new charger every time I get a phone, but like, anyone who's ever bought a computer understands I can buy any mouse, any keyboard, and attach it because of these things. So yeah, I think that's a perfect example of how to do it right.
Amazing. Well, with that, Grace, we've covered a ton of ground here. I appreciate you joining us to share your story, chat about the world of freight brokerage, freight fraud, and even hitting us with a bit of PR wisdom here to bring us home. But
Of
look
course.
forward to continuing reading your coverage and your beat here.
Thank
Cheers.
you so much. And thank you for, investing in some really great players. And I'm excited to see what more you guys can help out with. So we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.